Hey there. I've been a long time listener, and I had a story that I wanted to share with you that, unfortunately, happened to me. I used to work at a liquor store for a little over a year. I actually quit after this event occurred. I'm a single and first time mother. My baby is almost 10 months old, so, needless to say, she pretty much never leaves my sight. Sometimes my mom would visit and help me take care of her or watch her while I slept at my place, but it's not very often as she lives about an hour away. And that's more so when she just comes to visit on the weekends. I'm in my early 30s and had been with the same guy for the last 7 or 8 years until he learned that I was pregnant. Then he claimed that he never loved me and he was just there for the ride, etc., etc. So, he moved out of the apartment that we shared, leaving me to pay the rent alone, which I couldn't afford. After a nightmare of a move and more debt to deal with, I moved out too, and at least found a place that I could afford on my income. Before all of this chaos, I had a steady job at a staffing firm, irony, and they laid a lot of people off, which left me desperate to find anything that would pay me. That's how I ended up working at the liquor store. To my surprise, they treated us better than I expected. They even had benefit options and were flexible and willing to work with all of us when it came to our schedules. This was a huge relief for me because I didn't have someone that lived close by to watch my daughter, nor could I afford to pay for a babysitter or daycare. So, I told the owners, which was an older couple, about having such a young child, and their wife, Darla, was smitten when she saw her the first time. She told me that I was more than welcome to bring her with me, since it's not like she was going to be running down the aisles potentially breaking things. This was such a huge stress lifted from me, knowing that I could work and still keep my eye on my daughter. I usually stayed behind the counter at the register, and she stayed in her car seat. Darla actually brought in a small bassinet that she had bought specifically for me, and she kept it in the back room. When I worked, I would bring it out and set it up, which gave her a bit more wiggle room. They really did treat me like family. The pay was decent too, so I knew I would eventually need to find a job where I made more, but for the moment, I was feeling happy again, and felt like I belonged, so I was definitely getting comfortable with the job. Anyways, sorry for the ramblings. I didn't really have a set shift and would work days or nights, basically wherever they needed me. This happened when I was working the closing shift, which was from about 5 to 11, but more typically until midnight after all the closing work was done. It usually wasn't too busy being a smaller store, so it wasn't unusual to be alone on the night shift, which I was okay with too. We had a few of our regulars come in as normal, but then after 9 or 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night, it was pretty dead. I would turn on the TV that was behind the register or just watch something or play a game on my phone. The owners were okay with this, as long as when a customer came in, we were paying attention to them. Maybe not watching them like a hawk, but checking the above mirrors to make sure they're not stealing anything, and making sure you're giving them your attention. It made sense to me. So, on this night, I had my daughter in the bassinet, and she was sleeping. I was playing Sudoku on my phone when the doorbell chimed, and a guy walked in. I greeted him, and when all he did was look at me and quickly look away, I immediately took a mental note of what he looked like. Whether they're rude or suspicious, those people tend to stand out. Unfortunately, he was kind of hitting both labels. He was wearing jeans and a gray hoodie, with the hood pulled up. It had been raining though, so I could see the hood was a little wet, and I assumed that maybe that's why it was up. He had a bit of a beard growing that stuck out from the hoodie, but not much. And after opening the door, his hand remained in his front pocket when he walked around. This is when I started feeling a little uneasy about this guy. I would glance up at the mirrors and would see him constantly looking up at it too, and he would quickly look back down when our eyes would meet. I started watching his movements closer, and I noticed that he was looking around the store. Not like he was trying to find something, but more so casing the place. This started to worry me. We weren't in a bad or shady part of the city, and, in fact, the store was part of a strip mall of stores, which actually had a small open bar at the end. So, even though I was alone in the store, I was definitely not alone in the middle of nowhere. While doing my best to not let him notice my nervousness, I slowly dialed 911 on my phone and just let it sit there without hitting the call button, and then slid it back under the counter. After he walked up and down every aisle, he came back towards the front while also looking down the back where the office was. He then approached the register, empty-handed mind you, and turned his attention to the small shooter bottles that we kept up front on the counter. He grabbed a few and laid them in front of me. I asked him if he had found everything that he was looking for. While looking down, he said, "Kind of." He then looked up, making direct eye contact, and then asked, "Are you here alone?" I at least wasn't stupid enough to tell him the truth, so, trying to sound as intimidating as possible, I told him no, and that the boss was in the back and asked if he wanted me to get them. He gave me a sinister smirk, declining my offer, and tossed a few bills at me. After giving him his change, he grabbed the bottles and put them in his pocket, which is when I noticed there was already something in his pocket. Something long. I wanted to scream right there, but to my surprise, he just left. I watched as he walked around the corner, and when he was out of view, I quickly went to lock the door. At this point, I was pretty freaked out, and reasonably so. I called Darla to tell her what I just witnessed and let her know that I wasn't feeling comfortable with being alone. Thankfully, she agreed, and understood, and she said that she would have her husband James come down there. She also told me to keep the door locked and just let the customers in as they appear. This is what I meant by they were always very considerate, instead of just telling me to buck up. As far as I was aware, they had never been robbed, so it was a pretty scary situation all around. Made worse, in my opinion, because I had my little girl with me. So I waited anxiously for James to arrive, and just kind of paced to the front, watching my daughter as she seemed to be the only thing to calm me down. Unfortunately, this would come to an abrupt halt when I heard someone trying to open the door. When I looked over at the door, my heart dropped, seeing the same guy. Except, this time, I must have ruined his plans when he noticed the door was locked. I saw his face immediately turn to one of anger and aggression, and we then made eye contact. I froze, not knowing what to do as my phone was on the counter, which was closer to the door. The door and the two walls were just glass, so what was stopping him from trying to break it, or worse yet, how well would the glass hold with his banging and yanking on the door? Because that's exactly what he started doing. He began yanking on the door harder and pounding on the glass, while yelling at me to let him in. I just kept telling him no and yelling at him to leave, but he wouldn't let up. My daughter was now awake and crying, and this guy was yelling. I then noticed that his right hand, which he was using to bang on the door, was holding something. And when he would lower his arm to yell at me, I could finally tell that it was a large knife. I was in full panic mode at this point. I went to grab my daughter, ready to run to the back, when the glass finally broke. Thank God they had an alarm system that went off when there was glass breaking. So, with my daughter in my arms, I ran to the back and locked myself in the bathroom, hoping he wouldn't try to go back there. Unfortunately, as I sat there, I realized I didn't have my phone on me, so all I could do was wait until someone came to help. It felt like an eternity, trying to calm my daughter while also trying to keep myself calm, when I started hearing somebody calling out for me. They identified themselves as an officer and said that I was safe, so I opened the door. I saw two men standing by the door in uniform, and they asked me if I was okay, and then led me out to where James and Darla and a few other random people were. They hugged me, asked if I was alright, and also apologized that I had to go through that. We then all talked to the cops about what I saw, and thankfully, they at least had security cameras that recorded and saved every 24 hours. So, we were able to provide that to the authorities. The guy also didn't get very far, as some people that were leaving the nearby bar could hear this guy yelling and banging, and one of them, in their drunken bravery, chased him down. I had to identify him, and man, I never thought that IDing someone would be so unnerving, especially when they gave me that same smirk when pointing them out. Needless to say, I was pretty shaken up by this, and I told James and Darla that I didn't think I could do it anymore. They were disappointed to see me go, but also understood. I've been out of work for a little over a month, and I'm incredibly thankful that my mom has been able to help me with rent and groceries for this past month. Darla actually called me last week and said that they were putting in reinforced glass and a much better door because of this, which was good to hear. But she also asked if I would be willing to come back if I was only working on days. I'm still mulling it over, as it was a pretty decent paying job. But that night keeps replaying in my head. Anyways, thank you for listening.